Montana Territory, July 1879. The sun was high and cruel when they dragged her up the church steps in the mining town of Red Bluff, dust biting her eyes, wrists bound in front, and that miner's thick hand gripping her arm like iron. "Say your vows, girl," barked Sheriff Morris, sweat rolling off his brow. "You are his now." Francesca Dearing blinked against the glare, her lips split and dry. Her dress was torn at the hem, and her knees ached from where she had tripped on the road. She had not spoken since they tore her from her father's land 3 days prior. Her father was gone, now shot dead over a claim dispute, and with no man left to protect her, the town council decided she'd be handed off like livestock to the one who paid the most for her upkeep. That man was Caleb Trask, a miner with a reputation black as coal and a temper like dynamite. He stood at the altar, thick arms crossed, his beard matted with soot, eyes mean and greedy. "I don't want this," Francesca said quietly. Caleb stepped forward. "You do not get a say." And then the doors to the church burst open, boot heels echoed hard on the plank floor. A tall man stepped into the light, dust and heat trailing after him. He wore a brown hat low over his eyes, a rifle strapped across his back, and a calm in his stance that made every man in the room pause. "I reckon she does," he said. The room fell silent. Caleb narrowed his eyes. "Who the hell are you?" The stranger walked forward, slow and steady. "Name's Xander Poe. I have known Francesca since we were children. Her father was a good man, taught me how to ride, how to shoot, and how to stand up when it counts." Francesca's breath caught. She had not seen him in 9 years, not since he left to ride with the cattle drives down in Texas. He looked older now, his jaw lined with stubble, shoulders broader, but that same look burned in his eyes, that same quiet fire. "She is not yours," Xander said, stepping between her and Caleb, "and I will not let you force her into this." Sheriff Morris drew his gun halfway from his holster. "You are interfering with town business, Poe. This was agreed." Xander turned slowly toward him. "You want to shoot me for protecting a woman's right to choose her own life? You go ahead." Caleb pushed forward. "She's mine by law." "No," Xander said, voice low, "she is not." "Not while I still draw breath." Francesca stared up at him. "Why are you here?" He looked down at her, and there was something raw in his voice. "Because I should have come back sooner, because I never forgot you." Her knees nearly gave. He untied her wrists gently, his fingers brushing her skin. Then he turned to the sheriff. "I will take her with me. She is under my protection now." "You cannot just claim her like that," Caleb snarled. Xander's jaw ticked. "You did. Now I am doing the same. Only difference is she gets a say this time." Morris hesitated, then holstered his gun. "You better ride fast, Poe," Xander nodded. "We will." He helped Francesca down the steps, lifting her onto the saddle in front of him. Her hands clung to his arms as he kicked the horse into a gallop, the wind tearing around them as they left Red Bluff behind. They rode until night. When they stopped, it was in a grove of cottonwoods near a creek. He set up a small camp, started a fire, and gave her his coat. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked at him across the firelight. "I do not understand. Why would you risk your life for me?" He took a moment. "Because I still remember the girl who brought me bread when my father was too drunk to feed us. The girl who climbed trees higher than I dared. I have not seen you in years, Francesca, but I never forgot." She looked down at her hands. "I thought you were gone for good." "I was stupid," he said. "Thought I had to prove something. Turns out I left the only thing worth staying for." Francesca's voice cracked. "They were going to force me into a life I did not choose." "I know," he said gently, "but they will not again, not while I am breathing." She stared at the fire, then back at him. "You said you claimed me. Did you mean that?" His chest rose slowly. "Not like Trask did. I will not own you, but I would stand beside you if you wanted me." Her eyes glistened. "I do not know how to trust anyone anymore." "I will earn it," he said. "One day at a time." She nodded, and he reached across the space between them, his fingers brushing hers. She did not pull away. They slept beside that fire, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her back. And for the first time in days, she slept without fear. Morning broke soft and golden through the trees. Xander stood by the creek, washing his face when she stepped beside him. "I am not going back," she said. He looked at her. "You do not have to. We will keep riding." "Where to?" "There is a ranch near Miles City. I worked there a few years back." "They owe me a favor. Good land, quiet people. You could be free there," she nodded. "And you?" "I will be wherever you are," he said simply. She looked up at him, eyes searching. "You really never forgot me?" "Not for a day." Something cracked open in her chest, a breath she had held too long. "You were always the only boy I trusted," she whispered. "Then let me be the man you can trust now." She stepped closer. Her fingers curled around his shirt, her forehead resting against his chest. "I want that," she whispered. He wrapped his arms around her slowly, holding her like something sacred. As the sun rose over the plains, they stood by the creek, two people who had lost much, but found each other again in the dust and fire of the West. And this time, they were not letting go. They reached the outskirts of Miles City by midweek, trailing the Tongue River until the cottonwoods thinned and the grass rolled wide and golden. The land was quieter here. Less dust, fewer men with rifles slung too casual across their backs. Francesca rode behind Xander with her arms around his waist, the ache in her body dulled by the steady rhythm of the horse and the warm press of his back against her chest. They stopped at a weathered homestead on the rise above the river. Split-rail fencing ringed the pasture and a stone chimney puffed a thin line of smoke into the sky. Two dogs barked from the porch, tails stiff with uncertainty, then quieted as a man stepped out, wiping his hands on his trousers. He squinted into the sun. "That you, Poe?" Xander raised a hand. "Still breathing, Hatch." The man grinned, revealing a missing tooth. "Well, I'll be damned. Thought you were long set down in Texas." Xander dismounted and helped Francesca down before turning back. "I need work and a roof, just for a while." Hatch's eyes flicked to her. He didn't ask. "Plenty of fence to mend. Cattle'll need moving come end of the month. You know where the bunkhouse is?" Xander nodded. "We'll earn our keep." Francesca followed him across the yard. The bunkhouse was small, one room with a stone hearth, two cots, and a window that faced west. The walls smelled of cedar and old sweat, but it was dry and the latch worked. She sat on the edge of the bed, fingers in her lap. "He didn't ask about me." "He's a decent man," Xander said, placing their saddlebags down. "Knows what's his business and what ain't." She looked out the window. "I don't know how to be someone new." "You don't have to be," he said. "Just be here." That night, after they shared coffee boiled black in a tin cup, she walked the pasture alone. The moon hung low, casting pale light over the field. She heard Xander's steps before she saw him, boots soft against dry grass. "You always walk at night?" he asked. "Helps me breathe." He stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "When I was 16, I thought if I rode far enough, I'd come back different, smarter." "Braver? Did it work?" "I came back." She watched the way the wind bent the grass, the way his shadow stretched long beside hers. "What happened to your mother?" "She died before I left. Consumption. Pa drank himself to death not long after." She turned to him. "Why didn't you write?" "I kept thinking I would, but the longer I waited, the harder it got." She nodded and didn't press further. Her voice was quiet when she spoke again. "I used to make lists when I was little, all the things I'd do once I was free." "Like what?" "Ride a train. See the ocean. Learn to read more than bills and ledgers. I wanted to grow something too, something that belongs to me." He looked down at her. "You still can." She met his gaze. "If I believe it." He reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Then I'll believe it for both of us until you can." She didn't speak, just leaned into his side, and together they watched the stars blink into being one by one. By week's end, Xander was hauling fence posts out past the ridge, and Francesca helped in the garden behind the main house, pulling weeds with a woman named Ruth, who had a child on her hip and a quiet way of laughing that made Francesca feel less like a stranger. Ruth handed her a basket of beans and said, "You got a good one. Xander works like he owes the land something." Francesca wiped her hands on her apron. "He does." That evening she found him behind the barn, shirt damp from sweat, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He was oiling the saddle, hands sure and slow. She watched him a moment, then said, "I want to stay." He looked up. "You're sure?" "I want to plant something. I want to make roots." He set the rag down. "Then we'll find a way. There's land east of here. No one's claimed it yet." "Not much, but enough for a cabin and maybe a few goats," she smiled. "Sounds like a start." He stood, brushing sawdust from his trousers. "You'd build with me?" "I'd learn." He reached for her hand. "Then, Francesca Dearing, we'll build something that's ours. From the ground up." She laced her fingers through his. "That's the only kind worth having." A light frost laced the pasture by early September, turning each blade of grass silver before the sun burned it off. Francesca had taken to rising before dawn, slipping her arms into one of Xander's old flannel shirts and stepping barefoot across the packed earth floor of the bunkhouse. The mornings were quieter than she remembered from her childhood. No chickens to feed, no father's boots stomping across the porch, no voices raised in frustration about debts or drought. Just the hush of breath shared with someone who stood beside her. Xander had gone out early to help Hatch drive some strays down from the ridge. Francesca bundled a loaf of rye she'd baked the night before and carried it across the yard. Ruth met her halfway toward the cookhouse, brushing flour from her apron. "Hope you didn't bake that just for us," Ruth said, taking the bread with a satisfied nod. "I wanted to try something I hadn't before," Francesca replied, brushing her palms together. Ruth tilted her head. "You got plans to stay through winter?" Francesca looked toward the line of cottonwoods near the creek. "We're thinking of building east of here, close enough to help but far enough to live our own life." Ruth smiled with one side of her mouth. "Then you'll need help laying a root cellar before the freeze sets in, and maybe a pair of hands to help with the chinking." Francesca felt a quiet warmth in her chest. "We'd be grateful." That evening, Xander returned with a cut over his temple and a look of tired satisfaction. She dabbed the wound with a cloth dipped in cold water while he sat on a stool by the fire. "Caught a horn when one of the yearlings stumbled into the ravine," he said, wincing as she pressed the cloth. "Hatch says I should have ducked faster." "You're lucky it didn't catch your eye," she said, watching the skin redden under her touch. "I was thinking of you," he muttered. She paused, then returned to her task. "What do you mean? When it happened, I wasn't scared of the fall or the blood. I was scared of not coming back to you." She folded the cloth and sat across from him. "I don't know what to do with that." "Keep it," he said. "Let it sit with you." They shared a supper of beans and cornbread, and afterwards Xander rummaged through the saddlebags and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. "I've been drawing up the frame for the cabin," he said, laying it on the table. "I figure we can cut pine from the ridge. There's a spring near the bend where we can dig a well." She leaned over the drawing, tracing the lines with one finger. "Where would the stove go?" "Here," he pointed. "And we can build shelves above it. You always liked order." She nodded, then looked at him. "I want to help raise it. Not just sweep the floor after it's built." He met her gaze. "I wouldn't want it built without your hands on it." The next day, they rode out to the edge of the unclaimed land. The prairie opened in quiet folds, tall grass whispering under the wind. A stand of birch trees marked the edge of a rise, and below it, the land sloped gently toward a shallow creek bed. Francesca dismounted and walked the boundary, boot soles pressing the earth. "It feels honest here." Xander watched her from the saddle. "We could start clearing by week's end. If we lay the foundation before the first snow, we can finish the walls come October." She turned toward him. "I want to plant wildflowers near the door. You can plant whatever you want." He slid off the horse and walked to her. There was no hurry in his step, only the certainty of someone who knew where he belonged. "You're not afraid anymore," he said. "I still am," she replied, "but it's quieter now. It doesn't speak so loud in my chest." He took her hand, rough and steady against hers. "You've changed. So have you." They stood together as the wind moved through the grass, and in that stretch of silence they understood something unspoken had taken root, not just between them but within each of them, something that didn't need naming to be real. That night, as they lay in the bunkhouse with the door shuttered against the cold, Francesca whispered, I never imagined anything like this. Xander's voice was low. Neither did I. But now I don't want anything else. He reached for her hand beneath the blanket, lacing their fingers together. Then we build it, day by day. The wind brushed against the eaves and the fire burned low, but inside the quiet of their small room something steady had begun, not loud, not fast, but steady as stone. By late October the walls stood waist-high. Xander had spent most days at the site, cutting pine and fitting each log with chisels dulled by use. Francesca carried stones from the creek bed for the hearth, stacking them herself even when her shoulders ached. The mornings came colder now and frost lingered through midday, but neither of them spoke of stopping. One afternoon, as she knelt to wedge a flat stone beneath the threshold beam, she paused, frowning. Her hands had started to tremble, not from the cold but something deeper, more hollow. She leaned back on her heels, brushing her palms on her skirt. Xander set down the drawknife and crossed to her. "You're pale," she steadied her breath. "I didn't eat this morning." He crouched beside her, voice low. "That's not like you." She looked toward the unfinished frame. "I thought if I pushed hard enough I wouldn't think about the weight in my chest." He rested a hand on her back. "What weight?" "The not knowing," she said, voice catching. "What comes after the building is done, if I'll feel safe in it. If I'll know how to live in peace after so long without it." He didn't rush to fill the silence. His hand stayed steady. "I don't need you to be certain," he said finally, "but I want you to know you're not alone with that doubt." She leaned into him, her forehead brushing his shoulder. "What if I never stop waiting for something to go wrong? Then we meet each day as it comes," he said, "and I remind you of the good we're making." That night, Francesca returned to the bunkhouse alone while Xander stayed to finish the ridge beam. She lit a lantern and sat at the table, carefully unfolding a sheet of paper. Ruth had given her a primer weeks ago, a leftover from her husband's days teaching in Kansas before the war. Francesca traced each letter with her finger, then picked up the pencil. She wrote her name slowly, then his. The door opened behind her an hour later, boots creaking on the threshold. "You're up late," Xander said, removing his coat. "I wanted to learn something new," she murmured, turning the page toward him. He saw the names and said nothing at first. "Then, you never told me you wanted to read." "I didn't know if I could," she said, "but I want to read our land deed when it's signed. I want to read the seed catalog next spring. I want to write my own name when we file for the claim." He touched the page, his rough fingertip running over the shape of a single letter. "You've always been braver than me." "That's not true," she said, smiling for the first time since morning. "You came back." The next week, Ruth and Hatch joined them at the cabin site with a wagon load of salvaged shingles. Ruth brought her youngest son, a boy with a runny nose and a stubborn streak. Francesca taught him how to stack kindling without snapping it, and in return, he showed her how to whistle through a curled blade of grass. When the roof was finished, Hatch stood back and said, "It won't win any prizes, but it'll keep snow off your bed." "That's all we ask," Xander replied. Ruth pulled Francesca aside as the men worked on the shutters. "You built this with your own hands," Francesca nodded. "It still doesn't feel real." "It will the first time you wake up and nothing aches." That evening, with their own hearth lit for the first time, Xander laid out 2 mugs and poured the last of the cider Hatch had gifted them. Francesca sat across from him, the firelight touching her cheek, soft and warm. "I've never had a home that was mine before," she said. "You do now." He reached into his satchel and removed a small cloth bundle. She opened it to find a silver brooch shaped like a swallow in flight. "My mother wore it when she married," he said. "I've kept it all these years." She brushed her thumb over the metal. "Why now?" "Because I've never asked you for anything, not even your heart." She looked up at him. "And if I gave it?" "I'd carry it careful every day I lived." Then, without hesitation, she leaned forward and kissed him. Not out of gratitude or relief, but with a quiet certainty that had taken root through every beam they had raised, every silence shared between them. When they parted, she whispered, "You already have it." Outside, the wind moved through the grass, but inside, the fire glowed steady. And in that room they had built with their own hands, beneath a roof they had raised together, Francesca and Xander began their life not with ceremony, but with something far stronger: earned peace, and love that asked nothing but to be trusted. The first snow came early that November, light and dry, clinging to the cabin's roof in a quiet hush. Francesca stood barefoot on the smooth plank floor, pressing a hand to the window pane. The glass held a thin frost around the edges, but the fire behind her kept the room warm. Xander was out in the shed, oiling the harnesses before the leather stiffened. She could just make out his shape through the trees, his coat dusted white at the shoulders. She stepped back from the window and crossed to the hearth, where a flat pan of ash cakes rested atop a wire rack. She flipped them carefully, the scent of browned cornmeal softening the air. Her hair was tied back with a scrap of muslin she'd dyed with crushed berries the week before, the color not quite purple, not quite blue, but something in between that made Xander pause each time he looked at it. When he returned, he stamped the snow from his boots and hung his coat by the door. His hands were red from the cold, but his eyes went first to the pan. "You made them thinner than yesterday," he said. "I mixed in boiled milk this time." She watched him take a bite, his nod slow, approving. "Better? Tastes like something worth remembering." She poured him chicory from the pot and sat beside him on the bench. The table between them still bore the marks where he'd carved the frame, shallow grooves from a knife drawn too deep. She ran her finger along one. "You ever think about what comes 5 years from now?" she asked. He looked up. "You thinking about leaving already?" "No," she said, smiling faintly. "I'm thinking about what we'll be standing in when we've added more to this, if the roof will still hold, if we'll have goats by then. Maybe a boy or girl with your eyes." He leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him. 5 years, we'll have a second room, a porch. I'll be gray at the temples, and you'll still be making that face when you're trying not to laugh." She tilted her head. "What face?" "That one," he said, and reached to brush her cheek with the back of his hand. She caught it in both of hers, holding it there. "I love this place, Xander, but I love it because you're in it." He didn't speak for a moment. "Then, I've been thinking about that land title," she straightened. "We already filed, I know, but I want our names on it together. I want it to say Francesca Poe," her lips parted, breath catching. "Are you asking?" He reached into his coat pocket and set a folded paper on the table. "I went into town 2 days ago after the snow started. The clerk said we could amend it if we married before the end of the year." She opened the paper. It was a license, unsigned. "I don't have a ring," he said. "And I can't promise I'll never leave an axe out in the rain or forget to salt the meat, but I can promise I'll never walk away." She looked at the thin line of ink where her name would go, then met his eyes. "I never wanted a ring. I wanted someone who'd choose me every morning. Then will you?" She slid the paper toward her, then set her name beside his with slow, careful strokes. "We don't need a preacher?" she asked. He shook his head. "We just need 2 witnesses." Hatch and Ruth said they'd come by tomorrow. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Then I guess we'll say our vows with snow on the ground and ash cakes on the fire." The next day, they stood beneath the birch trees behind the cabin, with Ruth holding her youngest on one hip and Hatch leaning on his cane. Francesca wore the same muslin ribbon in her hair, the color faded but still lovely. Xander held her hands, his voice steady as he spoke the words they'd written together the night before. "I give you my work, my days, my name," he said. "And I take yours as the shape of home," she answered with a quiet strength. "I give you my choice, every day I'll make it again." Ruth laid a hand over her heart as they kissed. Hatch cleared his throat, mumbling something about how snow always seemed warmer when folks stopped worrying about their boots. That night, they lit every lantern in the cabin and boiled a pot of stew thick with root vegetables and barley. They ate with their knees touching, the shutters drawn tight against the wind. By the end of the week, Francesca had begun sewing curtains from the remnants of her old dresses. Xander hung a shelf above the hearth for her books, and another by the window for her jars of dried herbs and seeds. Come spring, they planted a patch behind the house. The soil was stubborn, but they worked it with care. By summer, the beans climbed the trellis, and the goats gave milk enough to trade for flour and salt. They never spoke of Red Bluff again, nor did they need to. What had broken behind them no longer shaped the days ahead. One evening in late July, Francesca stood barefoot on the porch, a baby wrapped against her chest. Xander was tying off the last of the fence posts when she called to him. "She has your brow," she said as he approached. He kissed her temple, then leaned down to press his lips to the child's head. "Poor thing, she'll grow into it." They stood together as the wind moved across the prairie, the sun dipping low behind the hills. The light caught the edges of their home, the porch they'd built, the door he'd carved, the window where she watched each morning begin. Xander wrapped an arm around her waist and held her close. The baby stirred once, then settled. The land stretched wide and quiet before them, and all that they had borne, grief, fear, hunger, hope, settled deep into the roots they'd laid. There was no more waiting for peace. It had come, not as a moment, but as a life, and they lived it together.